Hey, it's Benjie Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org, for more info, or you can email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Gail Glode. We'll be discussing her fantastic book, Rapture, available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I will say, Gail was brought to People of Distinction today by some of the best movers in the business, Parchment Global Publishing. If you have a book that you'd like moved, move it to Parchment. You can find them at parchmentglobalpublishing.com. And guys, it is an absolute honor to have Gail here on the line with us because, listen, her book we're going to be discussing today, Rapture. It's a fictional narrative, but what I love so much about it is the underlying themes, the underlying messages are something that is, it's just so universal. It's something that I believe we all strive for. I know I try to in my day-to-day lives, right? It's through the journey that we follow the main character going on. We start to learn the emphasis and really the importance of living our lives, really trying to be as happy as we can be, right? Not living our lives in fear. I mean, what a great message. What's so profound about that is really, again, as I stated, this is something that we all strive for. And what a great time for a message of this magnitude. Given what we're all going through with this pandemic, guys, how many of us right now at this current moment are living in fear? And rightfully so. Given what is going on, it's a scary time. Okay, there's a lot of questions in the air. There's a lot of imbalance in our day-to-day lives. So I'm sure a lot of us, myself included, is questioning so much of what's going on, is living in fear, really losing sight of how to live our day-to-day lives in a happy state, right? Really trying to find that cohesive nature and that balance to life. And I'm so excited that we have Gail here on the line because, again, through her book, even though her book has nothing to do with the pandemic, the underlying message is so relatable. It's something that we can take and we can apply to our day-to-day lives. And listen, Gail is the expert on the matter, okay? She's going to be able to articulate all the nuances in her book much better than I ever could. So without further ado, let's bring her here on the line with us. Gail, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
Good morning, Benji. Just fantastic. It's an amazing morning here, and I'm just so thrilled to be with you.
Fantastic. Well, listen, we are very, very thrilled to have you here. Now, Gail, let's jump right in. I mean, listen, I've done the research on it. I have some curiosities. And the first one that comes to mind is this story autobiographical in any way?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It is a work of fiction. But like many authors, I would say that they bring some of the truths from their personal experiences to their narratives, and that's the case with this as well. And so it's absolutely a work of fiction, but many of the characters, although they are not based on real people, certainly do bear resemblances to people and acquaintances and archetypes in my life, I would say. And those characters are usually amalgamation of archetypes.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I mean, I love fiction. I always go, for me, my personal preference would be fiction over nonfiction, but I love the fictional stories that I tend to lean towards the most are the ones that are steeped in reality, or at least taken from a realistic standpoint. So I completely understand where you're coming from. I'm very glad that you did that, even though it's not, of course, as you stated, it's a fictional narrative, but it's taken from people that you have met, right, and influenced by that. And I think that is a beautiful thing in and of itself. Now, what would you say, Gail, is the main takeaway message from the storylines?
Well, in some ways, it's quite a complex book that looks simple, and so it has some interesting takeaways. But I can make it very succinct if I have to, and that is, the first one is that it's so important for each and every one of us not to live in any kind of fear.
Absolutely.
And the second one is that we've really misunderstood our purpose, the purpose of life, because the purpose of life is to be happy. And those two things really are told in both the fictional story, the narrative of the story of the novel, and also within the actual message of a second book that's inserted inside the first book, which is in fact a self-help book.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Gail, I'm so glad you went there because, you started off by talking about the book can appear simple, but of course there's a lot of complexities to it. And that was really the next place that I wanted to go to is this idea of a book within a book, and a love affair within a love affair. Right off the bat, I mean, there's something that's very intriguing about it, but definitely seems very complex. Can you explain that notion, please?
Well, I can, but I have to tell you just a little bit of a story, not too complicated one. I'm a psychic, and I get channeled information. I don't like that word channeled, but that's the word that people currently use. Mm-hmm. So I received information that was a new way of looking at the human psyche. And that came to me over a series of evenings, of nights, and I wrote it all down. That became the basis for a book that I entitled, Thank God for Red Shoes. It was a self-help book to help us understand about how our psyche was actually an energetic system of checks and balances of positive and negative energies, and of basically a representation of love energies as opposed to fear energies. So the first book was Thank God for Red Shoes, and that I did self-publish that as a self-help book. And then I would say that I received some guidance in a variety of different ways, mm-hmm. that the book needed to have greater accessibility than a small self-published self-help book would have. And so I was given, if I can say it that way, the inspiration to write a novel that would have great accessibility, great appeal, because it would be happening in Italy, which of course the world loves, and that it would be about romance, which of course the world loves, and that in fact I should publish both books simultaneously. So the main character in Rapture is a psychic, and she is based on me. There is no doubt about it. She's not my identical twin, but almost. And she has channeled the book, Thank God for Red Shoes, which I, in fact, channeled. So it's amazing because the book has turned out to be quite prophetic in a way. She has great success with that book, with that channeled book, but not in North America, but rather in Italy. And what the book is all about is a promotional tour that she goes on in Italy in order to promote that self-help book.
Gail, of all the shows that I've done, you're definitely the first psychic that I've had on my network, and very, very excited that we're going to have you back on for a completely separate matter. But that's fantastic. I mean, again, we definitely can understand now what you're talking about when you say the complexities. I mean, there's such a vast world within a world developed there, and very creative idea for you to publish both books simultaneously that way, and incorporate a piece of yourself within your narrative. Now, in addition to that, there's also music kind of infused with it as well. Now, why is there music suggested through the storylines?
Well, I absolutely understand the power of music. Mm-hmm. My sensation is that music was one of the first things created in the universe. No, it's not my sensation. I know that. I can say with authority that I know that. Absolutely. And so I'm aware of the power of music. And I use music in my everyday life for all kinds of reasons. When I was writing this story, it seemed perfectly natural to me to include a lot of music, not just a little bit of music, but a lot of music at the beginning of every chapter, sometimes in the middle of a chapter, sometimes at the end. And in fact, this book to me has always had the feeling of a film. It's always felt like cinema. And I guess it's possible. It's not impossible that someday it might be a film, but that's the feeling that it had for me. And so these songs were a natural soundtrack of this story. And it was the lyrics, the melody, and the energy of the songs that mattered. Because at the beginning of chapters, they helped to set an energetic tone for what was about to happen in the story. And if something suddenly happened, they could be punctuated with another song. Sometimes it was at the end of a chapter where it added, in fact, some additional information and subliminally led the reader to read on.
Wonderful connection. That is absolutely beautiful. You know, Gail, following off of that, I mean, you talked before about the narrative takes place in Italy. And of course, Italy being a place that the world loves. I haven't been there myself. I've always wanted to go, and at some point I definitely will. But everybody that I've ever spoken to that has been to Italy, I've heard nothing but great things about it. I mean, it's a wonderful place. It's a beautiful place. Everybody loves it. Now, for you, I mean, how is it that you know Italy so well?
Boy, this I could talk about for a very long time. I live in the Pacific Northwest, but I do live part of each year in Italy. And in fact, I have two heart homes. One here because it's the home of the man I love and my family's here.
Absolutely.
But also my heart home is in Italy. When I go there, I just feel like I belong. I first went to Italy when I was in my 20s. This was in the 70s. And I went to study Italian. I already spoke French because I have an English mother and a French father. I grew up in Quebec in Canada, and I had a bilingual family. So I already spoke French. It was very easy for me to pick up Italian. And I was working at a university that allowed me to take courses. I had taken first-year Italian and loved it. Loved my professor. My professor is an amazing person. And, you know, decades later, he's still one of my best friends, which is just amazing.
Wow.
So he took us on a summer school course to Venice in Italy. I'd never been to Europe at all. And that trip changed my life. We went to study Italian language, which I think is one of the most beautiful, lyrical, melodic languages in the world, and there are reasons for that have to do with vowels and so on, but also the culture of Italy. And he was very good about introducing us to many cultural things while we were there. He was very tough. You either loved him or you hated him. I loved him, and I learned a ton of stuff. So Venice became like a second home to me, and by the end of the 6 weeks, there were people who told us that we spoke Italian as if we were Venetian. We'd even picked up the accent. Wow. It was just amazing. The most amazing thing, though, was the people. I have to say that because of anything that I love about Italy, it's people. And since that time, I've traveled extensively all over the country. I've been to 17 of 20 of the regions of Italy, and I live part of the year now in a rural part of Italy, which is Abruzzo, which is just delightful, an undiscovered gem, and the other part in Bologna, which is a magnificent jewel box of a city. So I have friends all over the country, and I love that place.
Fantastic. You know, keeping this momentum going where we're learning more about you, Gail, what are your two favorite books? I mean, one fiction, one nonfiction, and why?
It's really tough for me to narrow it down to two. You know, I love to read. I have read my whole life. My mother started reading to me aloud when I was, I believe, 3 years old. No, younger than that. And I still have the books she read to me. She read Pinocchio to me, which is an Italian book, which is just astounding. When I was 3, she read it aloud to me. I love books. But if I have to narrow it down to two, which is tough, I would say the fiction would be Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. which, it's one of the best-selling books of all time.
Absolutely.
I identify with what Paulo says about that book, because when he reads it, he doesn't really identify with having written it. He knows it was written through him. And there are universal truths in that book about following signs, because the universe is always speaking to us, always. And there's a lot in that book about omens, a lot of universal truths. And the big one is that you can travel the whole world looking for something, thinking that it is your treasure. And I'm not saying a spoiler here, because everybody knows this book. And in fact, it's usually in your own backyard.
Absolutely.
So it's really about looking for things in an outer way, in an outer journey. And in fact, it's all a metaphor for an inner journey, because the answer's in you.
There it is.
The piece of nonfiction, I guess, would be The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And it, like so many books that are about ancient wisdoms of First Nations people around the planet, is full of incredible gems. It's information that had to go underground, often when imperialistic times were with us, and there was a lot of arriving of people from Europe who wanted a lot of the wisdoms of people, of First Nations people all over the planet, to go underground, and they did, and have stayed silent for sometimes very long time. The Four Agreements, to me, really gives a template about how we can stop suffering. And again, it seems like a very simple book, and in fact, it's not a very simple book. It's not easy to live the Four Agreements. But so I like thoughtful books, and I think both of those books are really thoughtful, yet entertaining. I like parables. I've written a lot of parables. So yeah, I identify with those two authors.
Fantastic, Gail. Listen, jumping back into Rapture. Ego is something, of course, that comes up in the book, and it is something that is explored. Now, I really want to get your stance on this. I mean, how can you believe that ego is a positive thing when, our current understanding of it is always a negative one?
So in the first instance, I was given this information, again, as if it were a download. And again, I don't like that word download, but there you have it. I was given this information, and some of it came to me almost like dictation, and some of it was given to me in riddles, which I had to solve, which I love. I love solving riddles. It's the way my mind works. So I was given this model of an energetic system for the psyche that was very different from anything that had been known or offered to us before. Freud, the psychoanalyst, has, that's the one we know mostly, which is the ego, the id, and the superego. Mm-hmm. Then we have Carl Jung, who's got a whole different kind of way of looking at things, and he introduces the notion of the shadow, the darker side of us. So what this model does is it gives us, it's actually a 7-part model, and there's 3 parts on each side. One is on the love side, and one is on the fear side, because, of course, love and fear are opposites. So you would think that ego would be on the negative side, on the fear side, but it's not. It's on the positive side. And the reason for that is this, and we may have to not use the word ego in this context. When I rewrite the book, I may have to give this part of the psyche a different name just so it's not confusing to people. Mm-hmm. Because I think what happened is that we started to use the word ego in a very, very negative connotation. And I don't think that it would, ego is just the Latin word for I. That's all it is. Ego is Latin for the pronoun I. No connotations of negativity whatsoever there. But I think what happened was that, honestly, with the introduction of sort of traditional religions and also some societal things that were going on at the time, the notion that something should feel good was interpreted by many institutions as if that therefore must be bad. If you felt good about something, whether it was sex or eating or sin or whatever it was, then obviously had to be bad. And so I think that's where the negative connotation comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It also, that word shows up in a lot of channeled information, and I can think of a few pieces of sort of New Age Bibles kind of thing that use the word ego as if it's just a terrible thing that needs to be killed and destroyed and all of this kind of stuff, which really makes me very sad because that's not at all what ego means. If you took every New Age book that's ever been written and you take the word ego and substitute it with shadow, you have a much better understanding of what's going on. Because, think of people who are in the news right now who we think of having as a big ego. And, very self-involved, narcissistic, and so on. Mm-hmm. And in fact, what they have is a big shadow. What they have is a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of shame, a lot of humiliation that has prompted their ego, which is a positive thing, to try to search for validation somehow, because these two parts work in function. So that's an elaborate discussion, but that's basically it.
That is such a creative interpretation. I absolutely love that. I never viewed it from that standpoint. I, like many other, like the common, perception of that word is the negative connotation, the negative interpretation of it. It's such a creative way in which you're looking at it. Thank you so much for sharing. Gail, next question. Let's go into the sequel a little bit. Now, of course, we don't want to give too much away. Guys, you know what you got to do. I mean, if you want to learn more about this book, you want to learn about the sequel, there's no escaping it. You got to go to Amazon. You got to go to Barnes & Noble, pick up your copy. But since we have you here on the line, Gail, could you give us some hints about what happens in the sequel, Adagio?
Well, I can certainly give you some teaser kinds of things, absolutely, because it is a sequel to Rapture, so you have a lot of the same characters. You do have some new characters as well. Rapture took place, almost exclusively in Italy, and in Adagio, the story moves primarily to the Pacific Northwest. It moves to the area that I live in here, and what else can I tell you? There's the introduction of a lot of wisdom of the First Nations people of Canada, a lot of it in the book. And there's also a great deal of information about the difference between the notion of twin flames and soulmates. So, lots of stuff.
Fantastic. Well, listen, if Rapture is the first book in the trilogy, and Adagio is the sequel, can you tell us what the third book may be about?
Sure, and it's really cool. I mean, it isn't written yet. It's written in my head, but it's really cool because it follows the characters from the first two books, and again, it introduces some new characters. But it's actually what looks like three short stories, and so these characters that appear in the first two books are in fact part of a soul family that incarnates again and again together. And so in these three parts of the book, of the third book, you see them incarnating into these different times in these different places and how they play different roles for one another. So the three stories, in the first one, their souls are there as characters in the 1500s in Venice, actually, in Italy, and there's a story about how they interact there. So I'm talking about people's souls now, not their personalities. They've got different personalities in each of these three parts, but their souls, their essences are the same. So it's in the 1500s in Venice, and then they reappear in the 1800s in the Pacific Northwest. Again, their souls do. And you can see how there's some karma from that lifetime they had in the 1500s, and you understand why some of the things are playing out the way they are, and you don't a lot of other things. And then the third story is about present day, and it goes back and forth between Italy and the Pacific Northwest. So it's exciting. It's about a family of souls that keep incarnating together, as we all do, and about how they interact differently across time and space.
Gail, this has been absolutely incredible. I mean, so much information that we have covered. Listen, I don't know if there's anything more that can be said, but let me go ahead and just double check. I mean, what else would you like to tell us about the book Rapture that we haven't yet asked?
Oh boy, that's, again, I could go on at length here, but I mean, I believe in this book because I know sometimes I don't reread it often, but when I do reread it, I learn something from it every time. This was written through my hand, but there are wisdoms there that come from a divine place, and in it there are so many lessons about different faces of love, sisterly love, romantic love, motherly love, self-love, divine love, soft love, tough love, mental, emotional, spiritual love, and the importance above all of self-love. Not selfishness, but self-love. And so it's also, it can inform us a great deal about what we're seeing happening globally now, because what's happening to each one of us also happens to the entire collective, and everything affects everything else. So we as individuals have become completely out of balance within ourselves and within our communities and on our planet. And so when we do that in an individual way, when we're out of balance energetically in this new model of the psyche, then what happens is that if we've got too much negative energy, it has to find a way to express itself. And that usually shows up as disease, either physical ailments or mental ones. And it can be something mild, like a cold, which is telling you that you just need a break from something, or it can be cancer. It can be something life-threatening. If you've been getting a message about your life being out of balance and you haven't listened much, then it'll get louder. So this is where we find ourselves today in the planet, because we are so far out of balance about everything, about who we are, who we really are. We haven't understood that we need to love ourselves first, and that from there we can love everything else. We haven't learned about the law of attraction, that you have to vibrate love in order to pull in love. And it's just such a big, big concept. But where we find ourselves now is that we are seeing the results collectively of massive corrections, big ones, because we collectively have been so out of balance for so long, doing what we're doing to our planet, doing what we're doing to animals, doing what we're doing to one another. And source energy, Mother Nature, Gaia, whatever you want to call it, will not have it. Will not have it. And so we are seeing these major upheavals in so many ways, and there's no stopping them now because we've waited too long. We've had lots of messages that we haven't listened to, and so now we have to live with the corrections. And they're hard. They're hard. They're really hard. But, we are birthing a brand new world through all of this. And the baby is in the birth canal. We are birthing a brave new world. And it's hard to see that as we sit here right now because there's so much chaos, and there's more yet to come in the coming days. We can all feel that building. Unfortunately, we just have to go through that. But on the other side of it, we enter the age of Aquarius, and it is a place where everything is better. Everything is more peaceful, and love reigns. And we just have to get through these parts, because you have to deconstruct the old before you can build the new, and that's where we are right now.
Listen, Gail, you said a mouthful there. I mean, so many great points, so many eye-opening points, and it was beautifully said. Guys, listen, there's nothing more can be done. You know what you got to do. Head on over to Amazon, head on over to Barnes & Noble, pick up your copy of Rapture. While you're at it, though, she has other books that she's also mentioned during this interview that you also will not be disappointed by picking up. I promise you that. Keep a lookout for Thank God for Red Shoes, Peace in Your Heart, Adagio, which is the sequel to Rapture. And then, of course, check back in frequently on her Amazon and Barnes & Noble page because, of course, the third one, as we've already discussed in the trilogy, will be getting published very soon. Gail, this has been an absolute blessing, such an honor. Thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
It's been just such a pleasure, and I would invite people to check me out on Facebook and also on YouTube. There's a series of videos there that explain the energetic system and so on. So thanks so much, Benjie. Really, it's just been a pleasure.